Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Well, we did a little bit of a mini upload earlier, but this is the real subject for today's discussion, the disappearance of Brandon Lawson. Now, I fully admit that I am not like an expert who knows this case completely inside and out. I've done a couple uploads on YouTube where people have actually sent me a lot of comments, and one of the biggest things that caught my attention was that they're saying you have to hear the interview with Brandon's brother Kyle on the podcast called Crawl Space. I mean, they're even sort of saying, why didn't you talk about the interview that his brother did on Crawl Space? Why aren't you talking about Kyle Lawson's comments? And the simple response to that was, it's just like, I didn't know. I mean, when I put out my first upload on Brandon Lawson, I had no idea that Crawl Space was even a podcast. It's apparently hosted by those two guys, Lance and Tim. They worked with Missing More Murray. That was something that I followed for a while. They did many uploads. I only followed about the first 33 or something like that. And I just kind of took not exactly a disliking to them, just didn't think too favorably of their stuff after about 30 uploads. I mean, okay, so I guess I was staying away from anything associated with those guys. I had no idea that they even started something called Crawl Space. But what I did learn was that that's how I found out about their podcast. They did an interview with Brandon's brother, Kyle. And this was recommended to me by many people in the comments section. It's sort of like we get a lot more insight from someone who is firsthand. One of the biggest things that we have going on with true crime followers on the internet is, it's like there's just is so much missing in any sort of mainstream article, mainstream news coverage. They cannot put in the sort of details and understanding that we have from like talking to family members. And that's it. That is the single most valuable thing that we heard, in the kind of Kyle Lawson interview. Because it's like, you're not only hearing what happened, you're talking to somebody's brother who's telling you, okay, when he's using these words, it's like, this means this. This is how we said that. This is our code word for that. And Brandon was trying to communicate this idea. When you have just like 35 minutes with someone's family member, huge experience compared to reading articles or listening to mainstream news reports. However, though, I mean, things like that are not always available when it comes to true crime. And especially when the case of Brandon Lawson is quite different, because this is something where you have the phone call, the 911 call. And that was my first upload that I ever did about him, called Brandon Lawson, Stapers Theory, and 911 Call. And people were always just trying to figure out, what is he saying? And I mean, it's like we have, not only do we have someone talking about their family member, which many people do come forward to the public, but we also have firsthand media, like a primary source about something that happened on the night of Brandon's disappearance, that people can kind of put together. So it creates a different, very different understanding for us. I mean, it's a different sort of world. You're into a different set of parameters. Usually, you get one or the other. Usually you get like a family member that is talking about their missing or deceased relative, or you just have some type of media that is kind of very ambiguous, and then people aren't really sure how to interpret it, things of that nature. Okay, so to get to some of the points discussed, the most puzzling aspect of this case was the word Stapers, Stapers, and people were just like, what is he saying in that 911 call? And people had brought it to my attention in the comments section, but they're just also saying that Kyle Lawson says very clearly he was talking about state troopers. And the big thing is, though, there was a series of phone calls. There were like multiple phone calls were made to Kyle Lawson. It's not just one. He didn't even know his brother was calling 911. And the thing is, though, like, I kind of tend to agree with a lot of people who are kind of putting forward the idea that the police department, or whoever gave the edited 911 call to Ledessa, I'm not sure exactly which teams were involved with that, that they edited out the word state troopers, that Brandon wasn't saying stapers, he was very definitively saying state troopers, and that they edited out one of the syllables, the sound, whatever you'd want to call it. And yes, sound editing can do that. Sound engineering can do that very easily. They can pull out individual sounds, so that's why it sounds like stapers. And then there's also sort of a part in the middle where it says, like, people thought it was state troopers shot the first guy. But to talk about some of the things that Kyle Lawson put forward is that Brandon was saying that there were Mexicans after him that were sent after him by his wife Ledessa, that the state troopers got the first one, but there are still other people that were out there chasing him. The problem is, though, I mean, Kyle openly admits that Brandon was under the influence of methamphetamines, and that's just the word that I'll use. I'm not sure any kind of variety, variant, what the exact type. We'll just say methamphetamines. And it's like, that answers a lot. So, we also know that there were no gunshots that were heard on the recording, because the things that sounded like gunshots are actually cars that are going over a bridge that crosses the Colorado River. So, like, those are the sounds of the cars crossing the bridge. Now, I'm going to fully tell you, I mean, I was pulled into that sort of gunshot theory. I even said on one of my uploads, perhaps not the first one, maybe the second upload that I did, that it was possible that Brandon died at the end of the 911 call. Because it sounds like we're hearing gunshots, and then the 911 call just cuts off. However, Kyle Lawson is just like, no, absolutely not. And people have mentioned this to me before in the comment sections, but Kyle Lawson is like, absolutely not. There were even multiple calls after that. Brandon's calling him saying, he's even saying that he can see Kyle at one point, if I remember correctly from the interview. But it's like, Brandon's under the influence of methamphetamines, and I believe somebody responded to that by saying this is methamphetamine-induced psychosis, where you have someone who is kind of dealing with losing a grip on reality, so to speak. I don't really know if, like, how the methamphetamine would, like, lead to something like paranoia and such. Kyle said that he had done it in the past, and he never had, like, hallucinations to the point where he thinks that he can actually see somebody behind him. But paranoia and hallucinations are different. Just thinking someone's out to get you is quite different than actually being able to hallucinate and see a person coming after you. But it's like, it's very possible that there were no Mexicans out to get Brandon, for lack of a better term. I know it sounds a little crass when you say it like that, but I mean, Kyle openly said they didn't know anyone of Mexican descent. Like, and one of the things, though, is even if you're going to entertain the possibility that Ledessa was actually sending Mexicans after Brandon to chase him out of town, she spent thousands of dollars on an aerial survey of the area where Brandon disappeared. And it's just like, that's a big effort to go to cover your tracks. No, absolutely not. I don't think Ledessa had anything to do with his disappearance. This is probably someone who had an adverse reaction to something such as the methamphetamine. And it's like he was succumbed to tragedy, it seems like that. But some of the things that we have, going on is that people brought to my attention that they were using the word stratters actually as a code word for the police, and that's what Brandon was saying in the 911 call. But I listened to once again, I listened to the Crawl Space interview with Kyle, and he said that their code word for a police officer was one time. Like, it's just, I'm not sure why they chose that one specifically, but it was not stratters, and then like stratters or strapers. I mean, like I said before, I really agree with people where it says, like, if they edited the 911 call, which they did, we all know they did, they don't pretend that they didn't, they probably messed with the sound on those words so it wouldn't sound like state troopers. I mean, of course they would. They wouldn't want people thinking this is some giant weird conspiracy. But one thing, one of the major theories with the case that could still be legitimate is there was an officer that came by Brandon's truck, and Kyle Lawson was present. He's asking, is this your truck? No, it's not my brother's. It's not my truck. It's my brother's truck. He ran out of gas, right? So one of the theories that Kyle even entertained was, he's like, either Brandon ran off and fell into some tragedy, or that officer killed him. But that was not a state trooper even. That was a police officer, but that was not a state trooper. Did something happen later on and Brandon was shot? I mean, that was just something that was discussed on the Crawl Space podcast. Okay then, if Brandon wasn't murdered by the police, and many people thought he was, that was like the biggest theory online. He's saying that the state troopers were after him, he ran through the woods, and that he either got caught in the crossfire while they were trying to apprehend another suspect, or he saw something like illegal activity and they ran after him to try and silence him. I said from the very beginning, and this might be one of the few things from my very first Brandon Lawson upload that might still hold a little bit of water. Why on earth would someone be doing illegal business on the side of the road? Like, why? I mean, like, why would someone, whether it was the drug cartel theory or the state trooper theory, somebody said they thought that maybe he saw the state troopers unloading a body out of the trunk of the car. I was like, what are you talking about? On the side of the road so all the passing motorists can see you? I never entertained that. I was very adamant from the start that was probably not what happened. And based on the comments that we've heard from Kyle Lawson, I think that that's probably somewhat correct, that he didn't witness any illegal activity from a state trooper, or at the very least, he didn't witness someone conducting that type of activity on the side of the road, or a drug cartel deal, something of that nature. I mean, the kind of things that I entertained in the past was perhaps he thought he saw some state trooper maybe assaulting someone that he shouldn't have, or something like that. Not like unloading a dead body or selling drugs on the side of the road. Those things were kind of what some other people were going with, and I could never really support something like that. But once you understand, though, that he was under the influence of methamphetamine, and you understand that he's making multiple calls, and when he calls 911, I've never really been around anyone in that state, but one of the things is that he doesn't sound like he's high on drugs. He sounds like he's out of breath and he's in fear for his life. But I mean, to me, he didn't sound like he was high on drugs. It sounds like he's trying to call and get the cops there because somebody is after him. But what his brother's sort of saying is just like, that's all just, there wasn't anything real there. He was kind of in sort of a delusional state. Okay then, where is he? What happened to him? One of the things, though, is, we mentioned there was a bridge crossing the river, right? Cars are going over the bridge, making lots of noise. That's what people even thought, that it could be a gunshot in the background. If there's a river nearby, when someone is disoriented, the risk of drowning is so much higher, right? We've talked about this countless times. The smiley face killers theory, the Elisa Lam case, the death of Henry McCabe. We've talked about these things so many times. When someone is disoriented around a body of water, or even something just like a large capacity of water, like the Elisa Lam case, like she died in a water tank, the risk of death is so much higher. Did Brandon lose his orientation and end up in the river? And is this a case of drowning and then the river carried him somewhere else? Is that what happened? Is there an unidentified body in the morgue in a different part of the state of Texas that actually is Brandon? I personally don't believe Brandon is alive. One of the things that they were talking about is the police kind of just think that if he was under the influence of drugs, that he kind of just ran off and he wanted to run away from everything. Not exactly start a new life, but run away from existing problems. They're like, he had a warrant out for him. There was a warrant out for Brandon's arrest. Or I don't really know that stuff too well. Like a standing warrant or something like that, what it's called. Something like that. They had a warrant for him, though. Kyle explained very clearly, though, that Brandon had gone to jail, and once he had gotten out of jail, they found that that warrant was for something that he had done prior to going to jail for the other thing. It's just like, it's a series of criminal things that have been going on. Legal system, Justice Department, it's complicated, right? Alright, so they think that the police thought that he was just evading that. He just wanted to avoid that situation, but 5 years, going on 6 years right now at the time of this recording. I don't personally believe that Brandon is alive. I've said very clearly, I thought he died the night of that 911 call. I still stand by that, and one of the other things that people had been talking about is the land that Brandon was on was privately owned. It's like a 3,000 plus acre ranch, if you want to call it that. I believe it's used by certain groups of people for like private groups for hunting and such. So it's definitely not really close to any sort of like town or anything. Now, one of the things that people were saying from the beginning that is possible is Brandon could have, been bitten by a rattlesnake or something. He could have been gotten into some situation like that would have caused his death, even spending one day in the brush. I mean, I'm really glad that they talked about the descriptions of the terrain, because you hear him on the 911 call saying he ran through the woods, but at the same time, it's like the way he's describing it sounds like an open field. And the way that other people describe the area, it just sounds like there are two open fields on both sides of the road. And I was like, he must have been really far from the truck to run through the woods. But it really sounds like it's just there's a lot of brush in the area. If I heard correctly, Kyle was like, this is more just like cacti and stuff are even around in this kind of area that he was running around. But once again, something that could used by people for recreational hunting. A very large piece of property, though, 3,000 plus acres. They did the aerial survey of it that we mentioned, and he's not been found. Is it possible that he ended up in the river somehow and his body was moved to a different location? I know that parts of the Colorado River aren't very, very strong, and they don't move very fast, but I mean to the point where someone would be washed away for like tens and tens of miles, like to the point where you're down 70, 80 miles down the stream. The descriptions of the Colorado River that I've heard in the past, I'm not really sure if that would be possible, but I don't know this exact stretch that they're talking about outside of San Angelo, Texas. I mean, I'm a total outsider on that, never been to Texas, but just relying on other pieces of information. But that's just something that I had thought about. It's kind of one of the first responses that you hear about once you hear that there is the river there. There's a river nearby. And you hear Brandon's moving around a lot. He's definitely far from the truck. They drove up and down the road for an hour looking for him. And then they just had to call it quits. They even had the kid in the car. They just had to go. And it's like, he wasn't there. He never came back to the truck. They put the gas in the truck, though. That's another big point. Like, Brandon ran out of gas, and that seemed somewhat genuine. And they're like, they poured the $5 worth of gas into the truck from the gas can. He could have, if he had come back to the truck, he could have driven it. I mean, if he had the if he was still alert and functioning at that time. Once again, we talked about things, rattlesnakes, I don't know, scorpions, whatever things that could cause any sort of venomous or poisonous damage to a human being. And then there's always that possibility that it seems like Kyle Lawson was still entertaining that if somehow Brandon ran into that officer or something, and that police officer did in fact kill him. He's like, either that officer killed him or he ran off and got into some tragic situation. Ugh. Some people were saying that they are even more confused than before. I'm not exactly like that. I definitely think it sheds clarity on the situation. I definitely think that once you hear that Brandon was making multiple calls over the span of the evening to his brother, and just paranoia, perhaps he was hallucinating, maybe not. He did have an overdose once that caused a chemical imbalance in his brain that kind of affected, so he would have been affected by drugs differently than his brother would. And there's a river nearby, disorientation around a body of water. Also, just being in the brush for an extended period of time could have caused something hazardous. Yeah, what do we really make of that? It's just like, it's probably just Brandon got away from the truck and ended up in a tragic situation. All right, well, just been kind of putting that out, and a little bit more discussion on the case of Brandon Lawson. If you have anything to say at all, please drop a comment below.